Welcome to the Personality Politics podcast, the podcast that looks beyond the headlines, party labels, and Westminster noise to get to know the people behind British politics. I'm Tom Lane, and in each episode I sit down with politicians from across the political spectrum for honest, relaxed conversations about the experiences, relationships, and moments that have shaped them. Today I'm joined by Andrew Rosindell MP, the MP for Romford. Having first entered Parliament more than 2 decades ago, he's been a familiar face in British politics through changing governments, shifting political landscapes, and now a new chapter in his career with Reform UK. Let's get started. Hello, welcome to the latest edition of the Personality Politics podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Reform UK MP Andrew Rosindell. Andrew, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
I was looking through your social media before this interview, and I saw that yesterday was your 25 years since being elected as the MP for Romford. I just wondered how you felt about that and what it sort of means to have done a good 25-year stint.
Well, it's obviously a great privilege to represent my hometown in the House of Commons for 25 years, quarter of a century. That's a very long time. There's nothing, I think, in my life that's been a greater privilege than to be elected for the place that I grew up in, went to school, and have lived all my life. So, politics apart, I think that representing Romford has been a wonderful privilege. And 25 years on, I'm still going strong.
You talked about how that is your local area where you grew up, where you went to school. What was it like growing up in Romford, and what were you like during your younger days?
So I was always quite political at school ever since being able to understand anything about politics, probably the age of like 10, 11, 12. And Mrs. Thatcher became Prime Minister, I think, when I was at the age of like 13. And she inspired me. And she, uh, even at that early age, I was taken with the stance that she took, and her robust patriotic beliefs were certainly something that struck a chord with me. So being at school in those days, you're talking about the 70s and early 80s, we'd had a Labour government for quite some time. The country was not in a good place, and Margaret Thatcher came along and rescued the country. And it's her that really inspired me to get into politics in the first place. So I joined the Conservative Party at the age of 14. Cost me £1. That was all you had to pay in those days. And the very next day I joined, I was given a pile of leaflets to deliver. And I've been delivering leaflets for political causes ever since. So it's a great vocation, being in politics. And I think with me, I'm in politics for a purpose. I'm not there just to advance myself. I'm there because I believe in things and want to fight for the best things for my community in Romford, but also, most importantly of all, my country.
We talked about being sort of an early sort of aspirational politician, I guess. What were you actually like as a child on the school playgrounds? Were you quite loud? Were you argumentative? Were you having various debates on the school playground, or did that come slightly later?
Yeah, I did have debates. I did have opinions. I would say I was loud, but I would express my views very strongly. And as you can imagine, uh, any person at school that is expressing conservative type views doesn't go down well with the teachers. And certainly my teachers were mostly left wing, and they didn't like the political views I was coming out with. And I did get into a bit of trouble now and again, particularly wearing political badges. So, that's par for the course, really. When you're at school, young people are political. They're mostly left-wing, unfortunately. I wasn't. I was never left-wing. I always had right-of-centre views. Some would say right-wing views. And I wasn't afraid to express those views. And I've been the same ever since. I don't think I've changed. I've continued to do that.
Was your sort of home life interested in politics? Were your parents interested in politics? Was that something that was ingrained in you from sort of a home perspective?
Well, I think all I can say is that I was brought up in a family which was working class, middle class. My father was in the Royal Air Force in the war, so he'd fought for his country. Both my grandfathers, only one of whom I knew, had been in the British Army in the First World War. So I think I was brought up in a family that was naturally patriotic, naturally conservative with a small c. Certainly, no one in my family was Labour voting, but it's not because that's not why I joined the Conservative. Came to my own conclusions, and my parents were very supportive of me when I joined the Conservative Party and started my way into a political career. They were always very proud and supportive of me, and my family pretty much were all completely supportive of my political views. My brother and sister are a bit different because they come from a different generation. They were older than me, so they were brought up in the 50s and 60s. And so they had a slightly different view of the world, and I think they still do a little bit. But I was always, my views were always right wing. I was never any different, and I proudly fought for the things I believed in and have continued to do so.
You've talked about getting into politics at quite a young age. I think 14, you said. What was the reception like amongst, I guess, your peers? Did you have like friends that were interested in politics, or were you a bit, were they questioning you about it? What was that sort of like?
Yeah, some did, of course. Most young people just are not political at all. They think it's boring. I don't think the world has changed. I think a lot of young people today, if you talk politics to them, but there are an element that are very interested and do have strong political views. And certainly in those days, there was a mixture. And there were people that were, I mean, this was the era when people were campaigning to ban nuclear weapons. The CND were very strong. And so there was a big movement on that. And I was very much on the side of maintaining Britain's nuclear deterrent. But young people in those days, I think to begin with, were very anti what Mrs. Thatcher was doing. But I speak to friends that some of whom I bump into still that went to school with me in those days, and my goodness, they've changed completely. So they all say now that they're all voting for reform or conservative, and people that were left wing all those years ago or thought they were left wing have changed completely. So I think I was right all along about my political views, and I was glad I made a stance at school. But I was never unpopular because of it. People were intrigued, I think, especially the teachers. They're intrigued on why I had such strong political views at such an early age. But it didn't make me unpopular, but it made me a bit different, someone of interest, both amongst my friends at school, but also particularly amongst teachers and even the head teacher. And many times the head teacher would bring me in for a private chat and discuss things with me. So that was quite fun at an early age to to be the centre of attention because of that.
You talked about, I guess, the starting the journey early in terms of getting into politics. I wondered what you sort of thought would be a sort of future career for you, and if you always sort of wanted to be a member of parliament.
It's interesting you say that because when I joined the Conservative Party, I never thought about standing for Parliament. I did it because I supported Mrs. Thatcher and I believed in this country. And I did so because I was inspired by what she was standing for. I didn't think about, oh, could I be an MP? It didn't really occur to me. It only sort of occurred to me, a few years down the road once I got more involved and started to take on positions. I'd become chairman of my local YC branch at the age of 16. And I suppose over time you start to think, oh, could I stand as a councillor? Could I stand as an MP? But I was very given clear advice at the time that I wouldn't be up to being an MP. There was a lot of people said to me at the time that very good. You could be a good counsellor, but you never get to be an MP. You've got to have gone to one of the top universities or gone to public school or be the old school tie or, have connections to be a Conservative MP. That you're more likely to succeed if you were standing in the Labour Party. Often people would say that to me that you will not. It won't be easy for you to become a member of Parliament in the Conservative Party with my background. So a lot of people said, "Don't waste your time. You're never going to get there. You don't, you don't tick the boxes that in those days it was perceived you needed to tick to become a Conservative MP, but that didn't put me off, as you can see. I carried on, and I mean, one of the people that gave me huge encouragement actually was Jeffrey Archer, who I met when I was 16, and we've been friends ever since. And he's supported me all these years, and always said, "You can do it, you can do it." And uh, every time I held a position in politics, he would then say, "Right, now you've got that, now you go for this, and now you go." So he's always been supportive. I have many other people as well over the years. So I've had a lot of friends who've supported me, and I would say, however, that it's never really been about the titles. A lot of people collect titles, positions, honours. It's never really that doesn't get me up in the morning. I get up in the morning because I believe in things. I believe in principles and values that need to be championed, and that's what keeps me going.
When did that journey start to actually being in the job, I guess you're in now, of being a member of parliament? When did that journey begin for you, and what was that like?
So I first stood as a councillor, and that was in a by-election when I was 21. So I stood at the earliest age I could. It was a seat that nobody thought could be won. The Conservatives were like way down, but I did fight that by-election, and although I didn't win, I came very close. So I got a massive swing, and that sort of I got the bit between my teeth then about standing for elections, and so I decided to put my name in to stand for Parliament for the 1992 general election. And I knew there's no chance of getting a winnable seat, but I just wanted any seat, just the experience of standing. And I did put in for local constituencies in the Essex, East London area, like Dagenham, like Hackney, Newham, places like that. Came very close to being selected, actually, in some of them, but I didn't quite make it. But in the end, I did get selected. I got chosen for Glasgow, Provan, which is the east end of Glasgow. And although everyone said I was mad, I was actually really pleased I did that, because it gave me a whole new, opened my eyes to a different part of the country, and made me understand the importance of the union even more strongly than I had already before. So standing in Glasgow was a great experience, a good learning curve for me. So I did get selected for a seat for the 1992 election. I was selected in January of 91, thinking the election was going to be soon, but in fact it was about 14 months later. So I had about year and a quarter travelling up and down to Glasgow campaigning, but it was all good fun, and I learnt a lot, made lots of friends, and great platform to then go on to stand for other seats, which I did at the subsequent elections.
You talk about going to Glasgow there as someone, I guess, born and raised in Romford. What does that look like? Do you just go up to Glasgow like every week? Is there a hotel? Like, how does that work?
So, so I used to find all sorts of cheap ways of getting up there. I didn't have a lot of money in those days, so I used to go on the coach from Victoria. It's a bit of a grueling journey, or the train.
How many hours
Sometimes, if
is
I
that?
if I had a bit of spare cash, I'd go on British Midland, so I'd fly up to Glasgow. Luckily, there was an elderly Orange Order lady who was widowed, and she had a tenement in the East End of Glasgow, as they call them, and she had a spare room. So whenever I went up there, she would always let me stay. So I didn't have a problem with accommodation. And yes, it was tough. I mean, it was a part of the country I knew nothing about. I didn't know the area. The people were clearly not quite the same as you find down in Essex. So I did feel out of place, but nevertheless, I thought it was fantastic opportunity and great experience. And again, I fought a campaign very clearly on the things I believed in, which was the Union, the United Kingdom, upholding the British values, the monarchy, and also, even in those days, expressing scepticism over uh, the European project,
Mhm.
which was to turn into European Union.
You've talked about losing that election. What was that process like? We'll come on to the winning bit in a little while, but what was it like standing as an MP and losing that election?
Well, it was obvious I was going to lose. I was no way I was going to win in Glasgow, but I did actually keep my deposit and managed to push the Liberals back so that it was stayed in third place. And I actually got a very small swing to the Conservatives. Sorry, the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, which is what I officially stood as. So I actually got a little swing. So it was great, good experience. But I was never going to win that constituency. The next seat I thought was Thurrock, which is near Romford, so it's in Essex, and that was at the time looked like it could be a more of a winnable seat because it had gone Conservative in 87. It was one of the gains that Mrs Thatcher won in the 87 general election, and I was selected for that seat.
You've mentioned a few times since we started the interview, Margaret Thatcher. I wonder what sort of drew you to her as a leader and a political figure.
So I saw in her someone who was there for the right reasons in politics. Sadly, a lot of people are in politics to collect what they can, collect positions, titles, jobs. No one knows what they really believe in or what what drives them, what their vision is. It's just about their career progression. But don't condemn them for that. There's plenty of people like that in all walks of life. But I think in politics, there has to be, I believe, a purpose. There has to be a reason for doing what you're doing. There's no point being in politics unless you're fighting for change, if you're fighting for something better, if you believe in things you want to see happen. And I think with her, she was driven by beliefs, driven by love of country, driven by a belief in freedom, which no other politician was articulating in the same way. And she did it with a certain style which nobody could replicate. And she also spoke with authority because she believed in what she was saying. We all hear politicians talk, and half the time people don't listen because they're just reading from a script or they're saying what people want to hear, and it shows. When she spoke, she said what she believed in, and people listened. And although it divided people, ultimately she did the right thing for the country. So I was very inspired by her. She was the reason I got into politics. And when she left office in the way that she did, whilst I continued as a Conservative Party member and continued to support the Conservative Party, I never quite felt the same about the Conservative Party after uh, they turfed Mrs Thatcher out of office.
Yeah, we will come on to that a bit more later on in terms of Margaret Thatcher. But I wondered, going back to your, I guess, sort of timeline getting into politics, when did you discover that you would be standing in the Romford constituency? And how important was it to you to have that local element?
Well, in the 97 election, I didn't win Thurrock, and that was obviously a Tony Blair landslide victory. So I knew clearly that Thurrock was not going to be regained for the Conservatives. But what surprised me is how many constituencies went Labour that shouldn't have done in normal circumstances. Romford was one of them. So Romford was considered a very safe Conservative seat. It was my hometown. I'd been elected a councillor there, and therefore, when it became vacant unexpectedly, the sitting MP of 23 years suddenly stopped being the MP. It was an obvious choice for me to stand at the subsequent election in 2001, 25 years ago exactly.
Do you remember much about that night where you won the election? Were you expecting to win? What was your sort of feeling? Obviously, you mentioned the previous election was the Blair landslide, and 2001 was like a few years, obviously, into the Labour government. What was that evening like for you when you get elected as MP for your local area?
So honestly, I expected I would be elected. I sensed the mood of Romford throughout the entire campaign, and people were saying to me, because they knew me, I was from the area. I went to school there and knew people all my life, and I'd been a councillor by that stage for some years, 11 years. So people knew me, and people were saying to me, "We're going to vote for you because it's you." Uh, it wasn't so much the Conservative Party; it was me they were voting for, and that was even a greater reason to be proud that people had confidence in me as their local champion, if you like. And so I did think it was likely I would win. All the opinion polls predicted I would win, and although I won, I didn't expect to win with such a huge majority. So I went from a Labour majority of 600 odd to a Conservative majority of nearly 6,000 in one go. It was the biggest swing in the whole of the United Kingdom to the Conservative Party. So it was a great night. The BBC were there at the count, and they asked me to bring my dog into the count wearing his Union Jack coat. Margaret Thatcher had been to Romford 2 days before and had seen Spike with his Union Jack coat, and she'd been on the news with him. And the BBC said, "Would you bring your dog?" So I did. So we brought him into the count, and that was filmed live on the BBC at the time. So I think there was a sense that I was going to win. And when I did win, I was obviously incredibly proud, and I've not stopped being proud ever since.
Were you emotional on the night?
No, I wasn't emotional. I was a bit nervous because just becoming, being declared elected an MP is quite a thing. I was just slightly nervous, but no, I wasn't emotional. I was absolutely determined that now I'd become a member of Parliament, that I was going to start as I mean to go on. And uh, immediately after being elected, I had dozens of media requests, and I spent the entire night, including the entirety of the next day, going from studio to studio and being interviewed. And in fact, I've just been looking at some of my interviews, looking back 25 years ago. I've got some of them. In fact, I've put some of them on my Facebook and my Twitter so people can, there's a little collage of some of the interviews that I gave on the morning after and on that night. So yeah, it was a exhilarating time of my life, and I I just feel that uh, being an MP is very important because you're there for a purpose, but it's really incredibly special if you're also the MP for your hometown. Most MPs are not representing where they come from. Some are lucky enough to, but I'm very fortunate that for 25 years, people of Romford have chosen me as their representative.
Having grown up in Romford and obviously having been an MP for Romford for such a number of years, is there anything that you think makes Romford so special?
Yes, so Romford is a historic Essex market town. It orbits London, but it's not in London. Uh, so it has great character, great history, a wonderful marketplace with the Church of St Edward the Confessor. Uh, there's so much about Romford which distinguishes it from other parts of Greater London. We're a town and country borough. We're not like inner London. And the one hidden secret about Romford, which uh, nobody knows about until I show it to them, is that it has the best view of London anywhere you can ever imagine. So Romford is very high up. The town centre isn't, but the further you go up to the north of the constituency, it's the highest point into the east side of London in Essex. And you can see this amazing panoramic view of London all the way from Hampstead Heath down to Crystal Palace and everything in between, and then round the river over to Kent. So if you want the best view of the whole of London, come to Romford, to Havering Atty Bower, which is an old royal village, which is in the north of my constituency. It's where I was councillor for as well. And that's where you can actually see this magnificent view of London.
You talk about Romford being a sort of famous Essex market town. I wonder if you have a specific market stalls within Romford Market that you particularly are fond of, or you've been to
Well,
a number of times.
I have to say, sadly, the market's changed. So when I was growing up, the market was incredibly vibrant, fantastic place to go. Wet fish stalls, fruit and veg, and everything else. and you had the Barrow Boys, and you had all the traditional market traders, a bit like an East End market. That's what it was, East End Essex market, and it was fabulous and it was packed. And the people there were wonderful, and it was a real community. Sadly, over the years, partly because the world has changed, and people go online and buy, and they go to out of store supermarkets. We didn't have these mega Tesco's and Sainsbury's in those days like we do today, so inevitably the market isn't quite what it was, but it's still got its character. It's still got many of the kind of stalls that it had years ago, but it's just a bit smaller and hasn't got quite the atmosphere it used to, sadly. But also the local council have really failed to cherish the market and find ways to revitalise it and bring new market traders in. But it's still a great place to visit. I love going there, and the market traders are great supporters. Uh, They'll always put the Cross of St George up on throughout the year, and particularly on St George's Day, they'll fly the Union Jack. And when I go there, I get a great welcome from all the market traders. They're great people.
Fantastic. We talked a little bit about Romford there, talking about your time sort of getting back into the politics side of it. What was it like once you were elected? How did you find being an MP? Was there anything that surprised you?
So I'd been a researcher to, I think, 4 MPs at different points, in different capacities actually as well. So I did know quite a lot about what went on in Parliament. I already knew the basics. I knew the lie of the land. So there weren't complete surprises, but there were quite a few surprises about how things operate, how things work, and what's expected. And I'm a bit of an independently minded person. I don't like being told what to do by anybody, as anyone knows me will tell you. And suddenly you're under the whips, and that's always been a bit tricky for me. I've always been loyal to whichever party I'm in, but if I disagree, if I think a party's wrong, I say so, and I will make an argument for it, and rebel if necessary. So I think that's probably the thing that I found most difficult, is being told by the whips. Even if it didn't make any sense to me, being told you don't vote that way, you can't do that, or you don't go on that television program, and trying to, I think, when I'm being managed and controlled, I just fight back against that. I like to be a free spirit, independent, and speak my mind, and not be given a script. So I think that was the thing that I found most difficult.
Did you have when you get elected? Do you have any ambitions? Obviously, we've spoken, I guess, about having specific titles or specific roles and people being ambitious. Was that something that you were ever drawn to?
So yes, I would love to hold a position or positions, not because I want the title, because I want to do things. There's so many things I'd like to do. There's so many changes I'd like to see made in whole range of areas, which I've argued for over the years. But under our system, you have to be a minister to get anything done, and of course, ministers have little power unless they've also got support of the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister. So to get things done in this country is a nightmare. And so many of my friends who were ministers used to say to me, "Well, don't bother because we don't have any power." So I do wonder about the whole system. Actually, I do think it's too centralised, too controlling, and there are powers behind the throne that seem to pull the strings. So I'm a bit sceptical about it, especially as the way the country's gone. And I just think, we need radicalism again. And it goes back to what I was saying about Margaret Thatcher. She was radical, and she did what she believed in, and she didn't really care about upsetting people. She did what she thought was right for the country, and I think we need more of that today.
On sort of two double-headed question, having been an MP for such a long time, I wondered if you have any regrets or anything that you're particularly proud of, while being an MP.
Look, I could go through all kinds of things I've done over the years that I can say I'm very proud I did that. Very proud that I fought for that cause. But I suppose one of the proudest moments was meeting the Queen in Romford Market. She came to visit in 2003. And so that was wonderful for me to have greeted Her Majesty, the late Queen, to Romford. And also, I think probably some would say, "Oh, well, what does it matter?" But I think it does matter. It's a vital in terms of our national symbol, the national flag. It was me that fought to get the flag flying every day of the year from the Victoria Tower. Before that, the flag only flew when Parliament was in session, and I fought to get it flown every day of the year, including weekends, recess, evenings, bank holidays. Before, it didn't fly, only when the House was sitting. So most of the time, you had an empty flagpole. And I fought for that for a number of years until finally I won the argument, and the flag now flies every day of the year. So all these tourists that now come to London, whenever they take photographs of Parliament, then there's always going to be a Union Jack flying from Parliament. Whereas before, you had the empty flagpole, which I could never understand why that was a sensible thing to do. But yes, it took 9 years to change that tradition, and it actually involved me having to speak to the Queen personally about it, uh, for the rules to actually eventually change, which they did.
I think I read, doing my research beforehand, that one newspaper called you a flag fanatic. Is that something that you would go along with?
No, not at all. And it's not being fanatic. It's understanding the importance of identity and national symbols. As part of that, national and local symbols are very important. It's part of who you are, where you belong. It's part of your community, your nation, your country, your family. All these things matter uh, to people. They don't always realise how important they are, but they are. They do matter. And if you take ownership of your country, as you take ownership of your local community, you care about it. And having symbols such as flags, whether it's national flag, country, county flag, these matter, and you take pride in your local area or your country because of it. And losing your identity, I think, means that nobody knows what the country's about anymore. And when these things are diminished, when flags are hidden away for fear of upsetting people, actually what they're doing is ungluing the unity of this country, which has made us so strong and so powerful over the centuries. So I think the national flag should fly from all public buildings and from all schools. And the argument against it, I think, is completely invalid.
It's obviously been, as we mentioned a few times, 25 years that you've been an MP. There's been a degree of ups and downs across the sort of national political scene. If we talk about, I guess, the war in Iraq, the financial crisis, obviously the Brexit debates that went on and on and on, the COVID, for example. I wondered, sort of how you find this the turmoil that sometimes goes on a national level.
Look, there's always turmoil. That's the nature of politics, and that's because things happen. Events create turmoil. They create uh, division, and political leadership is about ending turmoil and bringing people back together again when there are conflicts. So yes, I mean, I became an MP in 2001. It was only 3 months after I was elected that 9/11 happened, and that was probably for me, a profound moment when that took place. I was actually in the air flying into Gatwick from Gibraltar when it happened, and I only found out when the plane landed. I switched on my phone, but I think the world changed after 9/11, and I've lived through that entire period. And I think mistakes have been made in how we've handled these things. But equally so, I think that uh, appeasing aggression is never the answer. You must always stand up to a bully and stand up to those who are out to commit evil atrocities against innocent people. So Britain's always stood up for those things and been strong, and we should continue to do so. Unfortunately, I think today Britain is not as strong as it should be. I think that a number of governments have not been able to do what I think was necessary for our country in making sure that we had adequate defences after the ending of the Cold War. The peace dividend is something I never really believed in. I always thought that it was a false, a false way to go in believing that you can reduce your armed forces and your defences, and I think that's now been proved correct. Sadly, I think that we're weaker than we should be, and I think that whoever's in government, we need to do much more now to rebuild our defences and restore pride to our armed forces, our Royal Navy particularly. I mean, when you consider the Falklands War and whether we could ever, mount a task force like that again, I think we've allowed our Royal Navy and our armed forces generally to be reduced to something which is not fit for purpose in the dangerous world we now live.
One of the reasons that I've started this podcast is to sort of go beyond party lines and that are sort of arguments that many people will see on TV and beyond. And also to find out a bit more about people that work in Westminster and the individuals themselves. I wonder a lot of stuff, and having spoken to previous guests, there's a lot of cross-party work that goes on. I wonder if you have any, I guess, friendships that would go beyond party lines, or any work that you've done cross-party that sort of proves that point that there is a lot of collaboration behind the
Oh yes,
scenes.
there's a lot of collaboration. I've got friends in all political parties. Uh, I'm not going to name them actually because it's probably unfair to name them, but I've got very good friends in the Labour Party and even the Liberals. I've even got some friends in the Liberal Democrats, and I think that actually most of us are all the same in the sense that we're here for good intentions. We believe in things, maybe different things, and there is a camaraderie even amongst people you disagree with, that there are some people that have just got a chip on their shoulder and they hate you because you're a Tory or because you're Reform or whatever. I've had that. You just got to live with that, unfortunately. But most people, I think, in Parliament are polite and friendly and have good intentions. They may be misguided, in my view, in many cases, but I wouldn't doubt their sincerity.
A little bit, I guess, more about you. How would you think that your sort of oldest friends would describe you?
Oh, I wouldn't like to say. I think they would probably. I think they would probably say he doesn't change. I remember. I'm not saying he's one of my oldest friends by any stretch of the imagination, but I saw David Cameron 5 years ago at a reunion dinner of the 2001 intake. So I got in 2001, as you know. Boris Johnson, George Osborne, David Cameron, myself, and a number of other prominent people were elected in that intake. And we had our 10-year anniversary dinner at Number 10 when David Cameron was Prime Minister, and we had our 20th anniversary in Number 10 when Boris was Prime Minister. And I walked in to the room at Number 10 for this dinner, and the only people in the room were Boris, who was then Prime Minister, George Osborne, and David Cameron. And I walked in as one of that intake, and David Cameron looked at me and he said, "Oh," he said, "Andrew," he said, "Look at you," he said, "You never change, do you? You never change." And I said to him, "That's actually, I take that as a compliment because I think that in politics, people do change. They do change their principles and their values in order to gain progression. And I rather like the fact that someone like David Cameron, who I've had quite a few disagreements with, can see that whilst, whilst with the same intake, in that sense, we're equals, he has noticed that I'm not someone to be to change my principles in order to gain preferment."
I guess, sort of on that note, you've obviously been an MP for a long period of time. Is there a difference between like Andrew Rosindell, the public figure, and Andrew Rosindell, the person that goes home and, I don't know, puts on some sort of television show?
I don't think so, actually. No, I think if I go home, I don't tend to put on the television show. I tend to go home and work. I read stuff. I do my emails. I make calls that I haven't had time to do during the day, and when I get a few hours, I'll just go to sleep and then wake up again, and it all starts again the next day. So no, I'm afraid, being an MP is a 9 to 5 job. Sorry, is a 24/7 job, I should say, if you do it properly, and you do have to sometimes take time out. So yeah, you do need to rest sometimes because it can be overwhelming. And you can get days off. You can go abroad and stuff like that. But even when I go abroad, I'm still working. I'm still on my laptop, making sure that I'm keeping up with all the work coming in. You never really get a day off as an MP, not if you do it properly. Okay, some MPs just leave it to their staff, and they hope their staff just deal with it. I don't. I like to see what's coming in. I like to make sure that the responses I'm sending, particularly to the media, are correct and expressing my opinions. So I'm a bit more hands on, I think, than quite a lot of MPs. So that does mean I don't have a lot of free time. But I suppose if I get any free time, then yes, I'll just fall asleep on the settee, which I have done quite a lot recently because with the local elections, I've been pretty tired after these local elections. And yes, there are times when I've just dozed off when I've come home.
Is there anything you think people misunderstand about you?
Yes, there are some people that seem to think my views are extreme or far right. I've had that said to me many, many times. We're called, well, I mean, all politicians are called names, aren't we? But, there are too many people that seem to have this perception. But actually, I'm not. I actually think I'm mainstream. I actually think my views are pretty much go with the grain of the British people. But I articulate them in a very clear way rather than in a muffled tone, which too many of my colleagues do, trying to appease everybody and actually doesn't get you anywhere in the end. It's better to be much clearer and stronger in how you project your opinions than it is to always dress it up in flowery language. So I tend to be clear about what I stand for. So people think, oh, he's an extremist. Well, actually, no. What I'm trying to do is articulate what I think is right for the country, but also represent what the people that voted for me also believe, and that's what I've always done.
You obviously were in the Conservative Party for a long period of your time, both in Westminster and beforehand, and now you've moved to Reform UK. I wonder if that was difficult on uh, on a personal level, and then if any of your sort of relationships with people in the Conservative Party changed.
Yes, some have. I mean, some have been distant and have not really spoken to me. They walk past and won't smile, won't say hello. I find that sad, really, because ultimately I've changed parties, but I haven't changed my philosophy at all. In fact, I am in reform. I'm actually arguing for all the things that I've always argued within the Conservative Party, but ultimately failed. I've always argued the Conservative Party should go back to being the type of party that I joined when Margaret Thatcher led the Conservative Party. But over the years, I watched it become more of a technocratic party. And sadly, after Margaret Thatcher left as leader, I don't think there's been. I mean, there's been some good leaders, like Michael Howard was a good leader. I think Liz Truss did her best, but she was pushed out. Uh, in my view, very unfairly. Boris did get Brexit done, sort of, but it wasn't done with much enthusiasm, and we left Northern Ireland behind. So I'm afraid, the Conservative Party has never been the same since Margaret Thatcher went.
Did you lose any friends over that?
Yes, you do lose some. Obviously, there are some people that were not happy. Some people would get a couple of angry people to begin with. But most people now say to me, "Look, Andrew, we understand why you've done it, and whilst we wish you hadn't, or we don't agree with you, we get why." And I think particularly they're saying that now after the local elections in Romford, where all 23 councillors elected were Reform and 0 Conservatives were elected. So I think people can see that I am going with the grain of my constituency.
Talking about that, and I guess there are issues that are divisive overall. How do you find dealing with, as someone that's representing a constituency, to work with people that you don't necessarily agree with on some major issues?
I represent everybody who's reasonable and polite and has a particular view. There are lots of people that have different politics to me, but they still talk to me, express their opinions, and I listen. And sometimes I think they've got good points, and sometimes I change my views. I'm not dogmatic. I am willing to listen and alter my views if I think there's a better outcome, or there's areas that we perhaps hadn't considered. I'm not one of these people that is lacks any type of pragmatism. I like people with alternative views. I like people challenging what I'm saying, as long as they don't mind being challenged back. And I think that ultimately that's the nature of politics, and you hopefully get the best conclusion. But normally it's me persuading other people to my views, but sometimes there are people that have persuaded me in a different direction. There are issues that I think actually, there's always this balance, particularly on the right, of tradition and culture and identity with the idea of freedom and people having liberal values. There's always that balance between the two. Do you have maximum freedom, or do you also uphold your tradition and community and family? So you do need that sort of balance. And often the debates that I've had are over, where do you find that happy medium between the two?
One thing I've seen, like, you may know that I used to work in the Romford area, and obviously it's sort of made national news. Is the debate around Romford Pride? I wondered if you had any views on that.
So I think, like with all things, everybody should be free in a free society to celebrate and to have any type of customs, traditions that they choose. That's freedom. I'm happy to see everybody having a good time and celebrating with their friends. What I'm not happy with is when these things become a political weapon, or if the state or the council is uh, having to fund these things. I think on the voluntary side of things, if anyone can meet and celebrate, have parties, take part in legal activities of any kind, then that's the great thing about Britain. So I don't single out any particular cause or celebration. I'm happy to see everybody celebrating in a free society. Unfortunately, some of these things do get hijacked by for political purposes, which I think is a shame.
As we sort of come to the end of the interview, I wondered if you could give yourself advice, looking back when you were younger. Is there's a single piece of advice, or maybe numerous pieces of advice that you would give young Andrew Rosindell?
Right. Well, that's probably the toughest question you've asked me. I would probably say that I suppose thinking about it, Uh, I think probably a mistake I've made is that I've been too easygoing on people that have let me down. In politics, people do let you down, uh, and I think sometimes you need to cut your losses and find new friends and new people to work with. So over the years, there's so many occasions where uh, you've given people opportunities, or you've brought people in, and then they've gone and done something which isn't good, or they have completely gone the different direction to what they said they would, and they've let you down. And I think there are times you just need to cut your losses and focus on finding new people to work with. So yeah, you can waste a lot of time on trying retrieving uh, broken political relationships, and sometimes it's better to have a clean break and find pastures anew. So that's probably, if I was going back and saying to myself, look, just cut your losses and move on. That's probably what I would do, because you do waste a lot of time on those sort of things. I think all politicians have the same problem, but I think in my case, yeah, if I could turn the clock back, I would say, look, time to move on rather than you know to keep trying to rebuild something that's gone.
I'd like to end the podcast with a quick fire round, but I have mischievously changed the quick fire round from this episode. So I'm going to ask you first if you're happy to do so. It's a winner stays on leaders edition. So we're going to compare the last 15 or so prime ministers, and you can pick which one would be your chosen one if you're happy to do so.
Chosen one in what sense?
like who would win from this person versus this
Oh, go
person,
on. Okay, we'll have a go.
for
Yeah.
example. So we'll have a bit of fun with it. We'll start off. Obviously, he's not the prime minister, but you would like him to become the prime minister, I assume. So the first round would be Nigel Farage or the current prime minister, Sir Keir Starmer.
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage or the last prime minister, Rishi Sunak.
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage or Liz Truss.
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson.
So we're talking about different periods in history here, aren't we? But no, Nigel Farage, because I think he genuinely did believe in Brexit and he would have made sure it happened correctly. Boris didn't quite achieve what he said he was going to achieve.
Nigel Farage stays on. Nigel Farage versus Theresa May.
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage versus David Cameron.
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage versus Gordon Brown.
Well, it's very easy questions, these, aren't they? Nigel Farage. But I know what you're leading up to.
There's a tricky few coming up. Nigel Farage versus Tony Blair.
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage versus John Major.
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage versus Margaret Thatcher.
Margaret Thatcher, but I think Nigel Farage would have made a great deputy prime minister to her and then prime minister after her.
Fantastic. I think we will leave it there in that case. So the winner of that round, Margaret Thatcher, just pips Nigel Farage for you, Andrew Rosindell.
Thank you.
Andrew, thank you very much for your time on the Personality Politics
Thank you very
podcast.
much. Thank you.
My thanks to Andrew Rosindell for joining me for today's conversation. If you've enjoyed this episode of Personality Politics, please consider following the podcast, leaving a rating or review, and sharing it with someone who might enjoy hearing a different side of political life. I've been Tom Lane. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time on the Personality Politics podcast.